After 5 seasons of watching Jesus call his disciples, heal the sick, confront religious leaders, and slowly move toward Jerusalem, the story has reached the point everyone knew was coming. But knowing the ending doesn't make what happens next any easier to watch. In fact, The Chosen appears to be leaning into exactly what makes this part of the story so powerful: the fear, the confusion, the betrayal, the loneliness, and the sacrifice behind the events that changed Christianity forever. Season 6 is built around the final 24 hours of Jesus' life, leading into his arrest, trial, crucifixion, and death. And unlike previous seasons, this isn't simply another chapter in a longer journey. The entire story has been moving toward this moment. The official season description makes that clear. Before the sun sets, Jesus will be dead. The Pharisees see what is happening as justice. The Romans see it as maintaining peace. But the people who follow Jesus see something completely different. They see the death of the man they believed would change everything. And that is what makes this trailer so unsettling. We already know what is coming, but The Chosen is showing us the story through the people who have to live through it. Jesus is no longer simply walking from one town to another, teaching crowds and performing miracles. Now the pressure is closing in from every direction. The people around him are beginning to realize that something terrible is happening, while Jesus himself remains focused on the path ahead. The disciples have spent years following him, but now they are about to face the moment they never truly understood. And there is another major change this season. Season 6 will not follow the normal release pattern of simply arriving as a complete season and moving on. The season will contain 6 episodes, with the first 3 arriving on Prime Video on November 15, 2026, followed by 1 episode each week through December 6. But then the story continues beyond television. The Season 6 finale will become a standalone theatrical event in spring 2027, focusing on the crucifixion. That means the story of Jesus' final hours is being treated on a much larger scale than anything The Chosen has attempted before. The trailer itself gives us a glimpse of why. We see Jesus surrounded by people who love him, people who fear him, and people who have already decided that he must die. We see familiar faces from the journey suddenly placed into the darkest moments of the story. Peter, Mary Magdalene, Jesus' mother Mary, Judas, Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, and the other disciples are no longer simply supporting characters in another episode. Their choices, their fears, and their reactions are about to become part of the final chapter. And then there is Jesus. Jonathan Rumy's return as Jesus gives this season an emotional weight that is difficult to ignore. Because this time the question isn't whether Jesus knows what is coming. The question is how everyone around him will react when they finally understand what he has been preparing for all along. That is where Season 6 could become very different from everything that came before it. The earlier seasons were often about discovering who Jesus was. This season is about discovering what his followers do when they are forced to watch him suffer. The trailer even gives us glimpses of the trial and the road toward the cross, making it clear that the story is moving rapidly toward its most painful moment. And yet, the series isn't presenting this only as a story about death. It is also about faith under pressure, about people struggling to understand what they are seeing, and about a man continuing forward even when the people closest to him cannot understand why. The Chosen has spent years building emotional connections with these characters. Now Season 6 is going to test every one of them. And if the trailer is any indication, the hardest part may not be watching Jesus walk toward the cross. It may be watching everyone who loves him realize that they cannot stop it. The closer Season 6 gets to the final night, the more the story begins to feel less like a normal season and more like a countdown. Every conversation carries more weight. Every decision feels permanent. And the disciples who have spent so long believing they understood where Jesus was leading them are about to discover that they may have misunderstood the journey completely. The story now moves into the events surrounding the Passover. Jesus enters Jerusalem knowing that the people around him are expecting something from him, while the religious authorities are becoming increasingly determined to stop him. The tension that has been building throughout the series is no longer something happening in the background. It is now driving everything forward. And then comes the moment that changes the relationship between Jesus and Judas forever. Judas agrees to betray Jesus and leads the authorities to him. For the disciples, this is not simply an arrest. It is the collapse of everything they thought they knew about their own group. The man who traveled with them, listened to Jesus, and shared their journey is now the person helping their enemies find him. That betrayal is especially painful because The Chosen has spent so much time showing us the disciples as real people rather than distant figures from history. We have watched them argue, misunderstand Jesus, become jealous, lose their temper, and slowly grow into the people he called them to become. So when Judas turns against Jesus, the moment carries the weight of an entire series of relationships. But Jesus does not run. That is one of the most important things about this final chapter. The arrest is not presented as something that happens because Jesus accidentally gets caught. He knows the danger is coming. He understands what Judas is doing. And yet he continues forward. From there, the story becomes even darker. Jesus is taken before the Jewish authorities, where the accusations against him begin to build. The religious leaders are looking for a reason to condemn him, while Jesus refuses to respond in the way they expect. The situation quickly moves beyond a disagreement over teachings. His life is now at stake. And while all of this is happening, the disciples are facing a crisis of their own. Peter, who has repeatedly shown that he wants to protect Jesus, is about to discover how difficult it is to remain brave when the danger becomes personal. The man who once promised that he would never abandon Jesus will be forced to confront his own fear. That is where the story becomes painfully human. Because the disciples are not standing outside the situation as heroes who already know how everything will end. They are frightened men watching their teacher being taken away. They do not have the perspective that viewers have today. They do not know what the resurrection will mean. They only know that the man they followed is being condemned. And then there is Mary. For years, The Chosen has given us a closer look at Jesus' relationship with his mother, and that makes these final events even more emotional. She isn't simply watching a famous religious event unfold. She is watching her son move toward death. That personal side of the story is exactly where The Chosen has always been strongest. The series takes events that millions of people already know and asks a different question. What did those moments feel like for the people who were actually there? Season 6 appears to be taking that approach further than ever. The trial, the betrayal, the fear among the disciples, and the growing pressure from the authorities all lead toward the same unavoidable destination. Jesus is eventually brought before Pontius Pilate, and the Roman governor is forced to decide what to do with a man who has been accused of challenging the established order. Pilate does not see Jesus the same way the religious leaders do. He is dealing with political pressure, public unrest, and the possibility that the situation could become a larger problem for Rome. And that creates another layer of tension, because the decision is no longer only about what the authorities believe. It becomes a question of what they are willing to do to keep control. Meanwhile, the people who follow Jesus are beginning to scatter. The confidence they once had is disappearing. The man who seemed untouchable, the man who healed people, commanded storms, confronted demons, and walked into impossible situations without fear, is now being beaten, questioned, and condemned. And that contrast is devastating. For 5 seasons, viewers have watched Jesus appear to have an answer for almost everything. Now, for the first time, the people around him are forced to watch him willingly walk into suffering. That is why the final stretch of Season 6 could hit harder than any previous season. The story isn't building toward a mystery. We already know the ending. The suspense comes from watching how every character reaches it. Judas has to live with his betrayal. Peter has to confront his denial. The disciples have to face the fact that their leader is being taken from them. Mary has to watch her son suffer. Pilate has to make a decision that will echo through history. And Jesus has to continue down a road that he already knows will end at the cross. The closer they get, the quieter the hope seems to become. But that is also what makes the story so powerful. Because the darkness of these events only matters because something bigger is coming. And The Chosen has been preparing its audience for that possibility since the beginning. Season 6 is not simply asking us to watch Jesus die. It is asking us to understand what his followers believed his death meant, and why, even in the darkest moment of the story, they were not seeing the whole picture yet. And then comes the moment everything has been building toward. Jesus is sentenced, the journey to Golgotha begins, and the story reaches the cross. For the disciples and the people who love him, this is the moment when hope seems to disappear completely. The man they followed, trusted, and believed in is being executed in front of them. There is no miracle stopping the soldiers. No sudden escape. No last-minute rescue. And that is exactly why this chapter carries so much emotional weight. The Chosen has spent 5 seasons showing us Jesus through the eyes of the people around him. We watch them meet him, question him, misunderstand him, trust him, and slowly realize that he was far more than the teacher they thought they were following. Now those same people have to stand at the edge of his death and confront the most painful question of all. What do you do when the person you believed would save you appears to be losing everything? For Mary Magdalene, the disciples, and especially Jesus' mother Mary, the cross is not an abstract religious symbol. It is happening right in front of them. It is personal. It is frightening. And it is final. But viewers know something the characters do not. The cross is not the end. That is where the emotional power of Season 6 ultimately comes from. The story may be moving into its darkest chapter, but the darkness is leading somewhere. The betrayal, the trial, the suffering, and the crucifixion are all part of a story that has been pointing towards something much bigger from the very beginning. And The Chosen is treating that final chapter on a scale that reflects its importance. The first 6 episodes are being released as the television portion of Season 6, while the crucifixion continues into a separate theatrical experience. That decision alone tells you how significant this part of the story is for the creators. They are not rushing through the final hours of Jesus' life just to reach the ending. They are giving the events surrounding the crucifixion room to breathe. That also means viewers may have to sit with the emotions of these final episodes longer than expected. There is no quick way through this story. There is no way to make the betrayal less painful, the trial less tense, or the crucifixion less devastating. And because The Chosen has spent so much time developing these characters, the final moments carry years of emotional history with them. Think about Peter. He started as a fisherman struggling with his own failures. He became one of Jesus' closest followers and repeatedly declared his loyalty. Yet when the moment of danger finally arrives, fear takes over. Think about Judas. He wasn't introduced simply as a villain waiting for the right moment. He spent years walking